Ascension, the story of an American generation starship launched in the 1960s, began with high hopes. Sometimes described as Mad Men in Space, it was originally announced as a new series set to premiere in November of 2014, but was quietly pulled from the lineup several weeks before its premiere date. That's not a good sign. Shortly thereafter, it was re-announced, this time as a miniseries. So, canceled before it premiered. Ascension is a hard sci-fi deep space exploration story, and a murder mystery, and a commentary on class, and a convoluted conspiracy yarn, and a soap opera. It's all of these things, and consequently it doesn't do any of them very well. But it's still worth mentioning because of what it tried to do and what it could have been had the producers been more confident in that first core idea. It begins aboard the USS Ascension.
A century-long sojourn to a new world, completed by the grandchildren of the brave souls who embarked on this adventure.
It's been 51 years since the ship was launched on its mission to Proxima Centauri. The crew of several hundred live in a closed and centrally planned society. Marriages are arranged according to a eugenics formula, and trades are separated in a class structure, with the dark and dingy lower decks being home to the Morlocks that make things work, and the upper decks housing the well-groomed command staff that seem to spend their time on political games and adultery. This can of 1960s America is thrown into disorder with the murder of a young woman whose older sister is having an affair with the XO, but is married to the chief of security. An investigation is launched, but it's mostly a political move to quickly find someone expendable that can be blamed. Not exactly the paragons of humanity going out to establish the first off-world HSAP franchise, but what can you do? Even with selective breeding, you can't pick the next generation. We joined the story halfway through the journey, with the first generation born on the ship. The middle crew.
The captain who launched and the captain who lands, that's who history will remember. The guy in the middle, who gives a shit?
Worse still, the whole mission is fake. This is but one of the ways that Ascension sabotages itself right from the start. The show was initially set up, both in its opening episode and its marketing, as a crew of colonists all alone on a ship, having to rely on each other and their 1960s tech, knowing they would never see their destination. This idea of a crew on an aging starship on a long journey of hope had echoes of Battlestar Galactica. It even had Six in a red dress. There was a lot of potential there for some truly great storytelling, as well as some thought-provoking hard science fiction. But that probably sounded a little slow for TV, so mystery boxes and murder and sex and political intrigue by incompetent, maladjusted meddlers was mixed in. And each cover-up and reveal gives way to something even less plausible.
That the US could launch an interstellar spacecraft right then, in the 60s, with the technology we had.
He's feeding me the same BS that you did about this being a sociological experiment.
You don't buy it. Put your best and brightest in a tin can for 50 years with no outside influence, and they'll change the world.
Sure, locking your best minds in a tube, cut off from any outside scientific advances, given fake jobs to waste their time and no profit incentive. Sounds like a great way to get a supercharged innovation factory going.
She is punctuated evolution made real. Everything we've been working for.
Ending with a eugenics program to breed psychics. Hence the project name Ascension, I suppose. The core problem from a writing standpoint is that Ascension promises its audience a certain kind of show, namely a deep space exploration story with a 60s twist. By yanking it away with the fake starship revelation, it fails to deliver on its promise and loses that audience. I have heard it argued that the viewer's jarred reaction kind of links us to the crew of the ship. We feel some sense of their reaction when they inevitably learn the truth. The problem with that is they're trapped inside. We can stop watching the show when it doesn't deliver what we started watching it for. Important lesson for TV writers. It also needs to be said that for all the implausible and outright nonsensical elements of the show's plot, we don't question the idea that a government might run a program based on lies, experiment on its citizens, and murder people to protect the secret. I've known people to object to the premise on the grounds that they wouldn't be able to keep a secret that big for that long.
I work for the government. Do you have any idea how incompetent it is? Do you really think that they could do something like this and no one would know?
But not that they would never try it. Our recent history is full of too many acts of official betrayal, and our culture has accepted this on some level. We can make shows and movies about nefarious government cover-ups and conspiracies that, in a less corrupt society, would be seen as absurd on the general premise. Mostly lost in the janky storytelling is the sense that Ascension's crew, believing they're on a mission to colonize a new world instead of being lab rats, are strangely innocent. Their hermetically sealed bit of the 1960s seems almost like a longing for the mythical good old days. While the details differ with each generation, the general feeling is universal. Ascension could have benefited greatly from working that angle with just a bit more skill. But for all its failings, Ascension had a lot of good elements. It had a lot of potential. There's a great show in there. They just put it together entirely wrong. Consider an alternate Ascension. Season 1 begins in the year 2060-something. The USS Ascension has been traveling through space for 100 years and is approaching Proxima. At this point, the ship is also a mess of improvised repairs and field-expedient modifications. Class divisions have formed over the century of isolation, but as they approach the day of planetfall, that society is cracking. The lower deck staff of ag workers and maintenance techs are making noise about changes, while the upper deck command staff are trying to preserve their status into the colonization, as well as clamp down on any disorder that might jeopardize the delicate matter of entering orbit around a planet they know very little about in a ship that is no longer in prime condition. There's a lot that can go wrong. The ship is decelerating as it approaches Proxima. It's turned around. The top deck, the heart of its rigid hierarchical structure, is literally looking backward toward Earth, toward the past. We can even have the literary device of a 100-year-old woman that remembers the earliest days of the mission and explicitly spells things out if necessary. The crew, small and culturally isolated, remains much more like the 1960s America it came from. We get the retro style in a starship, wood paneling in Sinatra, but it also opens the avenue to explore the social tensions of the 60s with the sci-fi slant. The young people born on the ship, the last generation before planetfall, were born into a mission and a plan that they had no say in. This young generation is trying to break free from that plan. They're approaching a new world and they want to make it their way, not the way some long-dead squares on a planet they'll never see thought it should be 100 years ago. We get hard sci-fi, we get to play with the history of not only the 1960s social upheaval, but the broader issues of class and economic disparity in America. The history of colonialism, both the good and the bad, and we can do it through real character drama based on profound differences in worldviews, instead of having to rely on contrived romance triangles. And then, at the end of the season, when this whole trapped on a spaceship thing is starting to wear thin, they begin landing on their target planet and find something like a warmer Mars. A planet that can be made into a livable world, but that's going to take a lot of work. That way, if the show gets canceled, it's still a complete story. But if it gets renewed for a second season, we don't have to rehash all the same ground inside this little ship that could very quickly turn into Mayberry in space. I'd really like to be telling you about that show, how it gave us new insight into the turmoil and optimism of the 60s, how it showed us a space program that looked at every possibility and picked the most ambitious and magnificent option, how it told a story of overcoming being born into a life that was already planned out and seemed to offer no options for anything better, a story that showed us that we can do great things and that our best days are ahead. But that's not what we got. Still, for all its flaws, I have a certain fondness for this show. If for no other reason than whether telling a story or exploring the cosmos, it's better to try and fail than to not try at all. This is also another instance where the Orion pulse drive concept is confused with constant thrust nuclear propulsion systems. They are not at all the same.